in case this is your first time visiting or listening, my name is Ann Spencer, and I'm a product person. And in a prior life, I had amazing opportunities to meet brilliant people, including Pete Warden when I was the data editor at O'Reilly Media. And I was also extremely fortunate to become his editor at that time. And over the years, we've had so many conversations that I deeply appreciate about data and machine learning. And we recently decided to record some of our conversations.
And I'm Pete Warden. I was one of the founders of TensorFlow. I'm now doing my own startup. Yeah, Anne has the t-shirt. Yeah, I've had so many fantastic conversations with Anne. I just really wanted to kind of have a reason to keep going.
I love these conversations because it helps me think about what's happening from different perspectives and stuff. And I think it's helpful to have these sorts of discussions. So speaking of that, in prior episodes, we've covered contextual industry insights. We've also covered model development, model optimization, particularly in regards to resource-constrained devices. And in this episode, we're going to be covering DeepSeek, right?
Yes.
And I'm particularly interested in hearing what Pete has to say, because in prior episodes, he's joked around and said he's worked on AI before it even worked and stuff like that. So I think his perspective will be very helpful for me in particular. And in case anyone listening isn't familiar with DeepSeek, I am assuming that you are, right? But just in case, right? DeepSeek, according to their user and developer terms of service, provides products and services based on models that were developed through stages, right? Stages of large-scale self-supervised pre-training and targeted optimization training. Now, DeepSeek also released a light preview of their reasoning model in November, okay? And then they released the first generation of their open weight reasoning model on January 20th. And it was this release that captured the attention of so many US-based companies and like mass media, and it just like took off, right? It took off to the point where it impacted the stock prices of a lot of US-based companies. And I think the reason why this happened is because it kind of challenged this perspective that US-based companies have no competition or very little competition when it comes to having the top spots in AI. But I would love to hear your take, Pete. This stuff, like you just like blow through, right?
Yeah.
You just like blew up, right? So what's your take on what's going on with DeepSeek right now?
Well, I think a lot of people, I think, in the industry were kind of surprised that people were so surprised.
Mm-hmm. Same here. Yep.
Exactly, because I feel like this very simplified idea had grown up that in order to do any AI, you need a whole bunch of NVIDIA GPUs, and that number is just going to keep growing, and there's no viable alternative. And it almost feels like for those of us old enough to remember the dot-com boom, like Sun was making incredible amounts of money because just to have a startup that set up a website, you needed to spend like $6 million on a bunch of super expensive specialized Sun boxes. And of course, what actually happened over the next few years was, and Google kind of led the way in this, was, hey, using open source, free software, and
for sure,
an army of kind of really cheap commodity PCs. Individually, each one of them was much less capable than the high end, and it was kind of less convenient at the start as well. Like it was easier just to buy something from Sun and just deploy it instead of setting up a network of 10 or 100 PCs. But it turns out that the 10 or 100 PCs alternative was way cheaper, way more extensible, and became the default, and Sun never really recovered from that. Now, I don't think NVIDIA's in that position. I think NVIDIA has, a lot of great stuff going for it, but it kind of became clear, I think, to a lot of people kind of at the coalface that investors and the public we're
Yeah.
taking a very
Yeah.
simplistic view of, there's no other game in town except for Nvidia, and
Hmm.
they're extrapolating from the recent past to basically say, oh yeah, people are just going to keep shoveling more and more money at Nvidia, and that's just kind of like a law of nature, and the companies who have the most money are the ones that are going to win,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
they're the ones that are going to get more investment.
Right. So how do you think this relates to people just really focusing on the training aspect, right? And the economics of the training aspects? Like what's your thinking about that, about their reaction? Right. Would love to hear your perspective on that. Right.
Yeah, and I feel it's been interesting because people haven't had like much of an incentive to uh, optimize NVIDIA software for them.
Mm-hmm.
Like at Google, I remember there was a whole bunch of kind of behind the scenes work looking at that kind of stuff, but it actually made more strategic sense to just come out with their own hardware. Um, the one like public example I can think of this is actually Scott Gray at Nirvana,
Mm-hmm.
which got acquired by Intel quite a few years ago. He had actually done something very similar to what the DeepSeek team have discussed in their paper,
Right.
where
Right.
he wrote in NVIDIA's own assembler uh, routines that were much faster than NVIDIA's standard libraries for doing training on NVIDIA GPUs. So what I think happens is that, at some point when you're spending enough money on GPUs, you might as well hire some software engineers to dive in and see if you can optimize that, the code that you're running. So you have to spend, if you're spending $10 million on GPUs every year, and you can save $1 million by reducing the load by 10%, then it's worth hiring a dedicated software engineer to try and, you know, optimize your particular use case. Um, and I feel like DeepSeek is kind of a really extreme example of that, but it's kind of economics in action. Like, you're spending so much money on something that the alternative, an alternative to reduce that wouldn't have made sense before actually starts to make sense.
I definitely appreciate that perspective, particularly as I've mentioned in prior episodes. One of the reasons why I love talking about stuff is you have this holistic perspective. So you take a step back and think about, okay, we should invest
Yeah,
software engineering resources into optimization and just buy more and buy more and buy more all the time, right? Especially if there's a restriction,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it's like, and I think that you in particular, from my perspective, have thought about this a lot because of resource constrained devices, right? So you're
yeah,
I think you already have that constraint mindset of like, okay, if I don't have so much, then how do we optimize for this, right? And so I love hearing about how you're even taking a step back and going, wait a second, like this is what I've experienced, this is what I've seen. Um, Perhaps instead of just buying more and bigger, we should think about optimizing for that. And I think that's probably a conversation
yeah,
that a lot of people are going to be having right now.
yes.
What about your conversations with other people in the field and industry? Because I know that my phone has been blowing up. So what
Yeah.
what what have some of your conversations been like and things like that?
Well, I got a chance to catch up with On Malik this week,
Mm-hmm.
and really, we had a really interesting conversation diving into a lot of these issues, and that really helped me sort of think about all of this stuff in a much, in a much deeper way. I mean, and a lot of it does boil down to that just economic incentive to do this stuff, and also the fact that these models, like 5 years ago, there were dozens of different major model architectures that you had to worry
Yeah,
about.
yeah,
These
yeah,
days, transformers and a very few variants of transformers are super dominant, which means that if you can optimize for just this one model architecture, and I talked about this a bit in, the idea of in a blog post I did about disposable ML frameworks, where old school ML frameworks had to take whatever model the user brought to them and had to make it run optimally. And that's where a lot of the complexity in like TensorFlow and PyTorch and these other frameworks came from, was they didn't know what you were going to run. You had almost infinite variations. But these days, we've kind of settled on almost like one architecture. And that means that doing software optimizations specific for that architecture is going to pay off in a lot of ways that it wouldn't have before.
For sure, for sure. Well, I love this conversation, but we're almost at time.
Yes. Well, I wanted to get some of your your thoughts as well, since we have like a couple of minutes. So
I think that when all this was happening, I knew, as you mentioned earlier, like I think I was in the camp of why are people so surprised, right? And then I realized, took a step back, and that's probably my bias, because I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of global teams, right?
Yeah.
Particularly when I was working on recommendation systems. So I mean, China is one of the leaders in developing recommendation systems. So for me, I think I was just so surprised that people were so surprised, right? And I'm interested to see that shift of thinking about what's going on in different countries and companies and whatnot, and how we come together and move forward, right? Like, I love the idea that we're going to be thinking more about optimization for what we have. I think that's going to result in lots of exciting things that are going to happen, and it's an interesting time to be alive right now, for sure.
Yes. Let's not build any extra power plants yet.
Yeah, so I think that's something that was top of mind for me. But yes, we are at time. So thanks again for all the insights, and deeply, deeply appreciated, right? So look forward to the next one, right?
Yeah, thanks so much, Dan. And thanks everybody for listening.
Okay.